Good morning. Buenos dias. Guten Tag. Dzień dobry. You know that? Polish. Jumbo Jumbo. Swahili. Ni hao. Is Yang here? He can correct me. Ming Laba. It's from Burma, Myanmar. Well, good morning to all of you. Since it is Sunday, I thought this would be appropriate. These are some items that appeared in church bulletins where they didn't proofread carefully. I'd say two prayers. And one more. Actually, one more. This is the last one. Proofread before you publish is the motto there. Well, good morning and welcome to the second day of the conference. I have a relatively short time to share with you a big idea. If you remember Michael Fullen yesterday, he talked about macro, kind of big picture, and micro. So I'm going to talk about macro for a few minutes today. As I did in my session yesterday, I will pause and invite you to converse with people seated nearby. So just make eye contact with people with whom you will talk, and we'll use these pauses a couple times in the next 45 minutes. So the book Schooling by Design is a look at understanding by design really set for the school level or the district level. There were two parts to the book. By the way, the slides that I'm showing you are posted or will be posted for the conference, so you can get them. This is from the chapter of contents. The first part of the book looks at a series of essential questions, including what is the mission of schooling? What should our curriculum accomplish? And 3 chapters entitled, beginning with the question, what's my job? So the first part of our book, we outline a vision and a conception of schooling, what we think schools can and should be. The second part of our book is really a practical guide. If you like any of these ideas, how do you act on them? And no surprise, we propose that we use a backward design planning process to plan to go forward in a school. I believe that any of the ideas you've heard at this conference could be planned backward in terms of this is what we'd like to be at our school, how do we develop a plan to get there? Planning with the end in mind. Now, being visual in nature, I developed a graphic organizer for our book, and I want to share it with you. And it is built around a construction, a building metaphor. So think of this as a house of schooling. Like any building, schools need a firm foundation, and we propose 2 foundational elements. One is a clear, compelling mission. The mission defines why your school exists and what you're trying to accomplish with students. The second foundational element reflects a set of learning principles, what we know and believe about learning, and the principles that we will act on in our teaching, in our curriculum planning, and in everything we do in school. So we think these are the foundational elements of the most effective schools. Building on that foundation, we need a curriculum and assessment system. And I highlight the word system, very much in line with Michael Fullen's ideas from yesterday. The curriculum and assessment system, it helps us enact our mission and reflect on learning principles. Building on that, we have instruction. This includes instructional practices, how we teach and the teaching techniques we use, but also the programs we employ to help us teach, and that includes textbooks, software, and other resource materials. But the placement of instruction above these other elements is to suggest that teaching is a means to an end, not an end in itself. And the choices of techniques we use, whether it's cooperative learning or Socratic seminar or direct instruction, should be a function of what we're trying to achieve and what we know about learning. The same thing with textbooks. Textbooks are not a curriculum. Textbook is a resource that we use selectively to help us achieve our curriculum goals. Moving up the house of schooling, those of you in administrative roles in a school deal with personnel, and that includes hiring. Who do you hire for your school and how do they fit? What's my job needs to be clear with people you hire. Professional development is a part of a leader's job, and professional development, I believe, should go all the way down to our mission and our learning principles, because principles of learning shouldn't just apply to children or students. If they're principles of learning, they apply to everyone in the school. And finally, at the top of our house of schooling are issues of policy, structure, resource allocation. Now, in some cases, policies are set by national groups or your school board. But many policies we enact in the school, and so we want to make sure that our policies are in line with our mission and our beliefs about learning. Similarly, with structures. By structure, I'm talking about things like scheduling, grouping practices, even grading and report cards are a structure. And in some cases, form doesn't follow function. In some cases, our structures may be in the way of our mission, or may be out of sync with what we know about learning. So the whole idea of restructuring schools is not just to have a new schedule or a different report card, it's to say, let's make sure our structures are in line with our mission and our beliefs about learning. In our book, we also talk about using backward design, not just as a curriculum planning process, but for anything in the school. We also have written about a set of strategic principles for implementation, and these are very much in line with Michael Fullen's work and some of his remarks yesterday. So these are just in the book. Permit me to show you one quick example of this as a systems approach. I was at a conference in the state of New York a couple of years ago, and it was a conference for district superintendents, heads of school districts. And I did my presentation. I showed this graphic. And after my presentation, a gentleman came up to me. I have to build this back up, show you what I want to show you. And he had a leather attaché case, and he brought it up to where I was presenting, and he put it down, and he pulled something out and he handed it to me. And it was a purchase order form, which you would send an order to a company. And on the purchase order form, I'd never seen this before, he said, "I think you'll like this, have a look." On the purchase order form was a logo of the school and the school name, and then it had one sentence mission of the school right on the purchase order. But below the mission statement, which was in a box, was a one sentence question in italicized font. And the question was, in what ways will this proposed expenditure help us meet our mission? It was a direct link from how we spend money to our mission. And it was in your face. I said, "That's interesting, I've never seen anything like that." He said, "We just started this last year." And he said, other than fixed expenses for heating and janitorial supplies, he said, "I'm asking all teachers, all department chairs to be very careful about their expenditures. We don't have unlimited resources, we have to focus and prioritize." And he said, "I wanted people to recognize that our priorities are around our mission in support of learning." So that's a simple but powerful example of a systems approach where everything needs to align, going all the way back down to our foundation of mission and learning. So in my relatively brief time with you, I like to just stimulate you with a couple of ideas for 3 of the categories on my house of schooling: mission, learning principles, and curriculum assessment system. So let me start with a few comments about mission. Some of you may be familiar with the book Good to Great, Jim Collins. Very interesting book. Well, he wrote a second book that's not as widely known called From Good to Great in the Social Sectors. And his comment was, if you run a business, your mission is to maximize profit for yourself and your shareholders. And your profit is a good metric, it's a good measure of your mission. But in social sector, like schooling, profit is not our motive as much as meeting our mission. And that the job of a leader, and I include teacher leaders in this job, is to be clear about our mission and to focus our efforts toward it. But we also have to measure how well we're doing with our mission, whether it's 21st century learning or improving students' math or science abilities. So that suggests that we have clarity about mission. And there's been a lot written about school missions, and you can look at your own. A clear mission, in my view, should describe the long-term goals or outcomes we have for students. When I look at mission statements for schools, often what I see is what the school will provide. We will offer a warm, nurturing environment. We will offer bilingual programs. We will stimulate students. That's fine in terms of what the school will do, but those are not outcomes. I propose that the best missions are very specific about the outcomes they have for their students. The outcomes need to be specific enough that we can act on them, i.e., we can build a curriculum, we can assess, and we can target them in our teaching. Whether you're in a more traditional school focusing on academic knowledge in discipline areas, or whether you're looking at 21st century learning of the sort that Young talked about, you need clarity about what these things mean. So when I look at mission statements for schools and school districts, there's some predictable types that are evident. Here is an example from the six C's that Michael Fullen referenced yesterday. And you may have one or more of these, maybe all of these, in your school mission. These are cross-disciplinary outcomes. More traditional schools might have outcomes like these. In fact, I think all schools have a primary goal or outcome of preparation in academics for students going into higher education or world of work. But most school missions, I see, have some other outcomes that are broader than just academic learning. And these are just a few examples. Regardless of your mission specifics, one of the things that I think is particularly necessary is clarity about what the mission outcomes mean, and that we act on them. Rick DeFore, who's well known in the US for his work on professional learning communities, wrote this in his classic book, The Power of Professional Learning Communities. He said, it's less important what you have on your mission as it is that you are acting on it, that it really influences what you do. It's too often the case I've seen where mission statements proclaim values and outcomes, but people don't really know them or act on them. We're just too busy covering content. So if we're going to act on a mission, we need to have clarity about what it means. And I want to show you one very specific idea for enacting that notion. If you were with in my session yesterday, you remember I used a T-chart to look at the difference between someone with deep understanding and someone with surface knowledge. You can do the same thing for outcomes in your mission statement. So whether your mission is to say, I want students academically prepared to succeed in higher education, or we want to develop creative thinking, we need to define and describe those in specific forms so that we know it when we see it, we can teach to it, we can assess for it. So I'm going to tell you a quick example that I thought was efficient but very effective at having not only the staff of a school, but the students in the school be very clear about these kinds of outcomes. So here's the story. This was a school in New Jersey, a middle school serving grades 6, 7, and 8, and they had 5 mission-related outcomes for their school. One of them was self-directed learner. We're committed to preparing students who can direct their own learning. Another one was a creative problem solver. Another was a critical thinker. Another was an effective communicator and an effective collaborator. So 5 C's, if you will. But here's what they did, and this is the list as an example. At the end of a school year, the students had left, but the faculty had 2 days together before they left for their vacation. On one of the days, they had a staff meeting. The teachers sat in mixed groups, mixed by subject and grade level, and they divided up their 5 mission-related outcomes so that one group looked at one, like self-directed learner. And the task was individually to write down what they believed a self-directed learner could do and what we would see if they were doing it in school. So individually they made their list, then in groups they talked about it, then they compiled a group list, and so 2 tables were doing self-directed learner, 2 tables were doing critical thinker, and so on. Then they posted their posters around the meeting room. Here's one for a creative and practical problem solver. And by the end of the meeting, they had draft lists of indicators for their 5 outcome areas from their mission. Somebody on the staff took responsibility for typing these up, emailed them to staff during the summer, and said, please reflect on these, and if you think we're missing something, add to it. When they came back at the beginning of the new school year, they had a well-developed draft of observable indicators for the 5 mission elements. But here's the cool thing they did. The first week of school in the homeroom classes, teachers led the students through the same exercise in grade 6, 7, and 8. So, for example, we have said that we want you to become a creative and practical problem solver. Well, what does that mean? What would you do if you could do that? And the kids got into the same exercise because we want the kids to understand what we're trying to achieve. It's not just words on a poster. The summary then, they took the student list and the faculty list and they synthesized them. And they came up with a set of 5 specific indicators of this sort. I learned about this when I visited the school. They had printed up attractive posters that were literally in the hallway when you entered the school, and they were in every classroom, they were in the faculty room, they were in the cafeteria. It was crystal clear when you go into this school, not only what their mission is in broad strokes, but very specific. And I believe this specificity is needed so we can act on our mission. We can assess the outcomes we value, both academic and transdisciplinary. Without this, they can remain words on a poster. So here's the last thing I'm going to ask you, and then a pause. For whatever your school is committed to, how are we acting on it? If we say critical thinking is one of our mission-related outcomes, what would I see in your curriculum that indicates that that's a priority? What evidence would I see in your assessments that kids are asked to think critically, and how are you evaluating their thinking? And when I visit classrooms, what kind of teaching would suggest that we are developing critical thinking? This is what a mission implies: clarity, specificity, and action. 3-minute pause on what you've heard just now. What do you think about this? Test, test. Okay, if I might interrupt your lively conversations. I also recommend, if you don't already have something like this, I recommend a symbol or visual that incorporates your mission. Here's just one example. This is from the International School of Beijing, which is an English-speaking, bilingual school in China. And this is the graphic that they focus on. So they are a high academic school, teaching academic standards. They use international baccalaureate as well as advanced placement programs. Majority of their kids go on to higher education, universities. But they also have a mission that focuses on other outcomes, including the idea of being a global citizen and a global thinker. And those are in blue around the perimeter. What's noteworthy about this school for me is it's just not a poster or words on a mission statement. Their curriculum, their assessment system is very deliberate about trying to achieve not only the academic outcomes, but the cross-disciplinary outcomes. But having a symbol, having posters of indicators, these are the kinds of things that bring a mission to life. So let me briefly touch on this second foundational element, learning principles. Every educator that I know has beliefs about learning, and presumably they influence how they act, how they teach, how they think about school, how they work with others to make decisions, and so forth. But what is less familiar in my experience is that schools have agreed on a set of principles of learning that collectively we believe in and are committed to. One of Michael Fullen's key research points that he brought out yesterday was the importance of a collective vision and focus, and that everybody is working off of the same song sheet, if you will. And the learning principles can have that function. We've written about this in our book. I'm going to be very brief here, But basically, learning principles reflect the best that we know about learning. You can look at the wonderful book, How People Learn, Visible Learning by John Hattie, Marzano's Research Strategies That Work, because we have the sources for this. But it should also reflect our own experience as learners. This isn't just research from abstract educational journals. This is stuff that we know from our own practice. Here is a quick example. I think one of the things we know about learning is that students often enhance their learning and put forth more effort when they have some degree of choice or control. Would you agree? So what does that mean in practice? If that was a learning principle, well, here are just two examples. We're going to have some opportunities, not for everything, but from time to time, for students to do some choosing around the topic they work on, or maybe the books they read, or the videos they view. So if we're doing research, we can teach research skills, but give kids a choice of topic. Another example. From time to time, not for everything, but from time to time, we're going to let the kids show their learning in ways that work for them. So we're not going to have a standardized test for everything. We're going to say to the kids, we want you to show evidence of this. How would you do that? So this is just an example of practical applications of a learning principle. But if we agree on the principles, then we can think about the actions. There are many sources for learning principles, and they're described in our book, and our time is too brief to get into this in more detail. But one simple but very effective resource comes from a book called Powerful Learning, written by Dr. Ron Brandt. Ron identified 10 key characteristics of highly effective learning, which to me are learning principles. And you saw number 4 a moment ago. Now I highlighted number 6. As Vygotsky says, learning is socially mediated. We learn in part by interacting with others, by hearing different points of view, by summarizing our idea and hearing someone else's, by teaching someone else. One of the reasons I use 3-minute pause is that I believe in that. So even in a large group, I think it's important to have some chance to interact. So if we said we agree with number 6, here are a couple of natural outcomes in action. So that's the idea. In a nutshell, it suggests that you look for opportunities to talk about learning, but more specifically to identify a set of beliefs about learning that you and your colleagues agree to. We're proposing that we make these explicit, and that once we have a list, and it might be 5 or 10, that we are committed to acting on them. Why? Because they reflect what we know and what we believe about learning. In our book, one of the more interesting chapters is chapter 4, and the title is, How Might We Depersonalize Teaching? And when people see that title, they say, wait a minute, aren't you supposed to personalize and get to know your students and be collegial with your colleagues? Of course. But we mean something different by depersonalize, and we mean it related to learning principles. It's not about what you like to do or what you're comfortable doing as much as it is what do students need to achieve the outcomes that we've identified. And what do we know about learning that impacts how you teach? I love this activity, and I always do it. Yeah, but is your activity in line with learning, and is it helping kids get better at what we say is important? We always read this book in 9th grade. Is it about the book, or is it about what the book in your teaching is meant to lead to? In other words, I think one of the challenges in independent schools is independence. And so we have to find a balance between appropriate autonomy and clarity and agreement so that we're all working in the same direction. And to me, we get that by clear mission and goals and agreements on principles of learning. I am the last person that wants to micromanage teaching, and I don't want to have to teach the way someone else teaches. But I will agree to acting on principles of learning in my own way. In other words, I think there can be appropriate freedom within structure. In the words of a country music song, a river needs banks to flow. We can have creativity and individual teacher freedom and school freedom, but we need banks to the river. And the banks to the river to me are mission and clarity about learning, embodied through a set of learning principles. So I could say a lot more about that, but I want to leave you with the thoughts about curriculum and assessment system. So let me pause for one moment, but I'm going to give you an analogy. In the U.S. Constitution, we have something called the Bill of Rights, and you have a version. It's a guarantee. So we think of the learning principles as like a Bill of Rights for learners. We are obligated to serve you based on what we know and believe about learning, and we're going to enact these as a set of principles. So that's the spirit of this idea. 3-minute pause. How does this strike you? What do you think? So here is our recommendation. Here is our recommendation. When the time is right, it may not be in the middle of the school year. It may be at the end of the year when you can stop and reflect, or at the beginning of the new school year, or during a retreat if you have those for your school. You would identify an explicit set of principles of learning, not too many, a small number, and you talk about what they mean in practice and what they mean for 5-year-olds and high school science classes and learning languages, and then we commit to acting on them. Once we have a list of learning principles, we use the list. When we're selecting instructional materials and resources, we ask the question, to what extent will this material or this resource help us enact our learning principles? When you visit classrooms to observe teaching, what do you look for and what do you talk about? Action on learning principles. This becomes very powerful if and when you have it in your school. All right, so I'm going to jump ahead since time is brief, but I really want to leave you with what for me is maybe, well, for me the important part of all this, because I'm a curriculum person. So if we have clarity about our mission and agreement on principles of learning, how do we enact those? Well, we need a curriculum and assessment system, and a few words and examples about that before I wrap up. Some of you may know the origin of the term curriculum, which is derived from Latin, and the translation roughly is a curriculum is the course to be run. So if we think of a curriculum as the course to be run, it implies a destination, and the destination should be our mission and the academic outcomes we're committed to. Too often, what I see in curriculum is a list of content topics laid out on a calendar map to be covered. That to me is not a curriculum, that's a tour guide schedule. A curriculum, to me, is our plan to achieve designated goals. If you were with me yesterday, you heard me talk about long-term transfer goals that reflect our mission. That to me, or those to me, are the destinations from which we plan backward. And we do it school-wide, so it's a macro system from 12 down to pre-K. If you were with me yesterday, you heard my contention that in a world where we can Google much of the world's information like that, we should adjust our priorities to focus more on teaching for conceptual understanding and transfer. So if you agree with those premises and we plan backward from this, well, what does it look like in terms of a curriculum and assessment system? Well, let me go back to my building analogy for a moment. If you were owner of a construction company and you had a contract to build a building, I don't think you would drive your trucks and drop off building materials and say, this is the 3rd grade pile, you 3rd grade teachers build something, and then over here we have an 8th grade pile, and here we have a math pile. You wouldn't do that, because you wouldn't have a coherent building if people were just building stuff in piles. You would begin with a blueprint. The blueprint is a vision for what you're trying to achieve long term, and it guides the building of the rooms and the floors and so on. So you want coherence in your curriculum assessment system. So in a nutshell, I'm going to show you my conception of a robust curriculum and assessment system. My red circle shouldn't have been there, but I didn't animate it properly. So if you take the circle out for a moment, here's our contention. A curriculum is planned backward from a small number of long-term transfer goals within and across subject areas. Critical thinking is a transfer goal, as is the ability to write for different purposes and audiences, as is the ability to conduct a scientific investigation properly, to understand what sound scientific investigation principles call for. A small number of long-term transfer goals. These, by the way, are reflective of standards in academic disciplines and whatever you define as 21st century skills. So we plan backward from a small number of long-term transfer goals. And those, by the way, should be in our mission, I think. Then, at the macro level, we identify things that kids are going to need to understand in order to transfer their learning. We call these overarching understandings. They're not limited to one grade or one topic. They're broader in scope. Similarly, we have a set of overarching essential questions that spiral through the curriculum. In fact, that to me is a definition of a viable curriculum. It is a coherent curriculum that builds year after year toward a small number of long-term goals, just like coaching soccer starts with little kids, but we're working toward the same game. So I'm just going to give you a few suggestions or examples of this, because there's a lot under this umbrella. Let's just take a couple quick examples. One of the big ideas in mathematics is the concept of mathematical modeling. So if we're teaching mathematics and we want kids to understand the concept of mathematical modeling, and we want them to be able to model things mathematically, what are some understandings about mathematical modeling? Well, here are two. Or here's one to start. We want students to understand basically that mathematicians and statisticians create models. The models help us describe and interpret things, and some mathematical and statistical models are predictive models, like a stock market forecast. But there's a subtler understanding we want kids to come to understand, and maybe this is for older kids, that like analogies in language have limits, so do models. So we have to be careful to make sure that our model is accurate and won't distort or mislead us. These are big ideas around mathematical modeling. Here are overarching essential questions that we could use not once, but again and again with different levels of math as we go up the grades. Now this is hard, long-term work. This is done by curriculum teams, or teachers of mathematics at different grade levels who come up with these. The good news is there are many sources that you could work from. But let's look at a very particular example from a school that had these in place. Third grade teachers. First week of school, they measure the height of their children and record the heights. Each month thereafter, the kids start measuring each other. In so doing, they're learning the skills and the tools of measurement. They're learning how to record numbers. They're even getting into fractions because we don't grow at perfect increments. As the year goes on, we have a lot of numbers we're gathering. How are we going to organize and keep track of these? So we introduce charts and tables, even when teacher shows kids Excel to make sense of and organize your numbers. At the end of the year, we want to show how much we grow, so we learn about graphic displays. And this set up their task. Boys and girls, let's look at how we grow this year. Did boys grow differently than girls? Did we grow more during one month than another? How does our class compare to the other third grades? Let's look at our charts. Let's now prepare a lesson or a presentation for second graders to teach them how much they're likely to grow given our growth this year. What a great, authentic task that involves a sophisticated idea of mathematical modeling, but developmentally appropriate. Two other wrinkles to this. One of the teachers that developed this had another idea. She said, and I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to have my kids write a letter to the principal telling her why she shouldn't buy one-size desk for third grade. Because we come in at different heights and we grow a lot, don't you know? What a purposeful link to writing based on mathematical modeling, data collection, and analysis. And the other teacher had something I thought was brilliant. She said, boys and girls, look at our growth line. What if we continued that into fourth grade? What about eighth grade? Look, we'll be 8 feet tall. But do you know any 8-foot tall eighth graders? What do you think that means? I thought that was a brilliant example of getting at this idea. Maybe the line doesn't stay straight forever. This is linear equations brought down to third grade. My point here is clarity about the big ideas that you want kids to understand, and interesting essential questions gives us ideas for teaching this across the grades. Because after all, we want to build so the kids become more sophisticated at mathematical modeling while recognizing that models have limits. That's just one quick illustration. Now, the last thing, actually I want to show you one other thing. Coming up with these ideas requires people with a good knowledge of the content they teach. You can't come up with a central question if you don't know the content. But you have people on your staff who know the content, and you get them together to look at and develop ideas such as this. So here are examples of essential questions that we might use for reading. They're overarching questions, right? In the sense that you don't ask these one time, you can ask these again and again, with little kids looking at picture books and seniors looking at world-class literature. My friend Greg Curtis at the International School of Beijing has orchestrated this by design. They've had opportunities for teachers to get together in curriculum teams, cross divisions, and come up with sets of essential questions. These are shared with all faculty for feedback. They try them out for a year, they adjust, and then they actually have produced a set of posters for the essential questions for all of their subject areas. Again, this signals that we have clarity and focus. We're all working on the same song sheet. The only cautionary note about putting these onto posters is you don't want them so locked in that you could never add or change a question. But with digital technology, you can make that quick change quickly and print it on your large-scale color printer. And that's what they did in Beijing. So my time is just about up, but permit me to share with you one other, to me, linchpin idea of this curriculum assessment system. And this is just for provocation. It's one thing to have mission outcomes and to have related essential questions for those missions, and everybody agrees on all that. But it's another to have evidence of the impact of our teaching and our curriculum. So I believe that the centerpiece of a curriculum and assessment system are a set of assessments that reflect and give us evidence of student learning and improvement around our goals. The term that I've used is cornerstone tasks. And I use this in two ways. Well, the main way is with a building and architectural metaphor. Like a cornerstone anchors a building, we're going to anchor our curriculum over time by a set of rich tasks that have kids doing the things we say we want them to get better at, our long-term transfer goals based on our mission, but it gives us evidence of their growth and improvement along the way. Let me leave you with characteristics and a few examples. Characteristics. When I talk about cornerstone performance tasks, they are performance tasks that ask students to perform with their knowledge and their skills. These are tasks that require understanding and transfer. These are not tests of factual knowledge or basic skills. You need basic skills to do this, but basic skills are insufficient. This, in my view, these tasks are the place to capture 21st century learning goals if you have them in your mission. Otherwise, in my experience, things like creative thinking, citizenship, character development will fall through the cracks of content pressures and test pressures, particularly at the secondary level. With all good intention, they're not going to be addressed by design unless you systematize them, And I believe the way you do that is through a set of rich tasks. Look, this is hard work. This takes time. This is a project very well suited to network of schools, by the way. But let me leave you with a few examples. If we say one of our outcomes in science is for students to understand the nature of scientific investigation such that they can actually conduct an investigation, here's a task that we might do with 4th, 5th, 6th grade students. If our mission says we're committed to contributing students who are contributing citizens, we might have a task like this. And teachers do this. This isn't new, but let's do it by design. If we say we want students to apply their learning to real-world problems, what about this for high school students? And about 6 months from now, we're unfortunately likely to see more spread on more continents. What is the trend? And what, if any, government policies are influencing the spread, whether it's quarantine or vaccination or availability of some of the new drugs that are coming out. So the point here is you operationalize your mission in terms of long-term transfer goals through a set of rich tasks that engage students in critical and creative thinking and applying academic knowledge in context. Are we going to throw out multiple choice tests or standardized exams? Of course not. They're part of our assessment photo album. But we're going to enhance and enrich the assessments we use and signal to students that we're interested in your application. My last visual may be a little hard to read, but this is from an international school in Honduras, where over the past school year, they engaged staff in coming up with a set of cornerstone tasks, K to 12, focusing on the language arts literacy outcomes, but tying it in to other subjects. Many of these tasks are interdisciplinary. They did this by design. So just as we plan backward from soccer to work with youth soccer and learning the basic skills and getting better and better, we plan backward from our mission and enact it through a set of rich, authentic performance tasks that build from simple to complex, and we have evidence of student growth along the way. There's much more to say about this, but I'm going to leave you with a couple of visuals. Failure to plan a curriculum assessment system by design will have the equivalent of these construction glitches. That's the ceiling, by the way. I wouldn't check the paper on the porch in this location. I'm not sure how to get down these stairs. And then one of the more egregious examples of poor design. So we want to avoid a curriculum and assessment system that looks like these. The ideas in our book expand on this, and I hope it will serve you well. Thank you for your attentiveness on Sunday morning.